Okay, so the concept of taking that LCN 1261 series and getting it to close that final quarter inch, um, regardless of what closer it is, there are three primary ways to mount a closer: regular arm, top jamb, and parallel arm. You have parallel arm. If you notice, the arm from the closer to the elbow, the main arm, is basically parallel to the face of the door. That's why they call it parallel arm. Then the forearm goes from the elbow to that bracket, that parallel arm bracket. That's kind of parallel, not quite. Between the main arm, there is the female rectangular shaped area that will receive the flattened bar that will slide into it from the forearm. If you were to loosen the screw that holds those two together, the two will separate or come partially separated. If you take that position and you shorten that distance, what you're doing is you're taking the main arm and you're forcing it to tip further back away from the face of the door, so that you are in effect setting the internal spindle, the closer shaft, to its inner workings in such a place that it will increase the amount of hydrostatic pressure on the inside of the closer body that is going to make the door, or increase the amount of force wanting to pull the door closed. Unfortunately, the parallel arm mount is the least efficient way to close a door in terms of the door closer itself. If you have a 1261, that would be an adjustable closer, and I believe up to a size, well, they say it's a size 5. So we're going to be able to talk about a couple of ways, 3 different ways to mitigate this problem, hopefully. So assuming you have a 3-foot door, and that is an outswing, you would need a size 4 closer, meaning that the spring needs to be adjusted down to a size 4. When it comes from the factory, it might already be set at a size 3, so that spring may need to be adjusted. Changing the geometry of the arm is method 1. Increasing the spring power will be method 2. Changing the method of mounting will be number 3. So let's go through them, and we're going to hop to a screen view to proceed with trying to discuss this. Okay, now the first method was going to be modifying the geometry of the door closer. And what we have here are the installation instructions for the parallel arm mount for your door closer. And it is literally referenced here in step 5, figure 3, okay, that you will loosen that screw and then push the arm out this way so that you can shorten the distance from the elbow to the mounting bracket. Now that is called preload. Preload main arm as shown in Tighten arm screw. You might simply need to increase the preload, or there may not be any preload, and the fact that it's not set enough. Okay, so that would be the first method of how to handle that. Okay, now the other thing that you can attempt to do is adjust the spring power. And the spring power is shown to you on, it will be on one end of the cylinder. One end of the cylinder ought to be your hinge side. So let's take a look at the photographs that you have provided here. Okay, we can't really see there either. Okay, so yeah, we can't really see where your spring is, where your spring adjustment is. But we are certainly to see that on the hinge side. So with the proper 5/32 hex wrench, you should be able to increase that torque. Now that's going to make the door more difficult to open, no doubt, but adjusting the spring power might be necessary. Perhaps opening the valve slightly to make the door move faster through its closing cycle, especially at the latch speed, might be necessary. And that will, permit the door possibly to close better here. Okay. The third method is to change the method of mounting altogether. And I don't really expect either of these methods, the spring power or the latch, to work. I'm very optimistic. I'm hopeful that what's illustrated here with increasing preload will solve the problem. If neither of those solve the problem, before we go to the third option, which is changing the method of mounting, I would suggest that you take this screw, remove it, and let both of these pieces set free from each other, and then inspect the door when it is in the closed position. So what I'm driving at here is you could have a mechanical problem on the door. So without that door closer installed, I'd like to know, I believe, I don't recall the hand of your door. I think we've got it right. Not that it really matters. Yeah, you should have a what we would call a right-hand reverse door. Okay. With the closer not working, when you push the door into the 0 degree, does it stay there, or does the door kind of bounce back out? Does it want to spring back open that 1/4 inch that is causing us the trouble? And it could be that releasing the latch, if the door is hinge bound, is letting that door just pop and spring back open just ever so slightly. And that's the issue that you might need to mitigate, and it may not be a door closer problem. So you could have a hinge bound door situation where if we were to inspect the area in here where the hinge is, okay, you might literally have a problem where your door edge is hitting here. So every time the latch is released, it wants to spring back open. Now let's take a look at a document that will allow us to investigate how to possibly mitigate this problem. Now there is an organization called the Steel Door Institute. It's steeldoor.org, and you will find in their document SDI 122.-15, you're going to find ways to mitigate ill-fitting door or problems with a door hanging in the frame. And you might want to look at improper door frame clearance. And you might want to look at the shimming section. I just Control F for shim. I didn't see it listed in the structure here, but I just searched the document for shim. And what we are illustrating is we've got issues of door misalignment completely, but you could have hinge bind, or it could be hinge bound. And what you might want to consider doing, obviously reviewing all of this, but what you might want to do is seriously consider taking a steel shim, something made of steel, and tipping the door, okay, perhaps as shown in figure C and D, where you're going to change how that door sits in the door rabbet. Okay. Now what I'm driving at is that it will take the door that's sitting here, which may, again, if I were to exaggerate it, maybe it's naturally being forced out this way, but you might be able to take that by adding a shim out here and out here, perhaps, one or the other, and taking that door and making its natural tendency to want to come back in this way. That might be the way to go about resolving it as well, by adding that shim. So the door is naturally always tipping towards this stop face. Rather than it being sprung this way, maybe we can have it sprung this way. And that's what the point is of this shim at C and D. Now, the last method that I might suggest, and frankly, I am most hopeful that, and there is a link to the PDF of that as well, I am indeed most hopeful that shimming it as detailed earlier with your shims C and D here will help tip that door in this way. Okay. Now the last method, and obviously the last thing to try, would be to simply change the installation mount to what's called a top jamb. That's on page 2 of the final document, and that's where you relocate the closer body to the header of the frame and then attach the arm to the face of the door. Sure, you're going to be left with 4 holes in your door. You could fill those with sex bolts, is what it's called. You can just fill it with steel screws or sex bolts to blank that off. The reason that I suggest it is because from a mechanical perspective, the door closer is far more efficient when it is trying to pull the door closed in this orientation, when the arm is perpendicular to the face of the door rather than parallel. Okay, that might be an option as well in order to help accommodate the situation. I would increase the preload. Let's wrap this video up. So I would increase the preload. Draw those pieces together. If that doesn't work, shim it with your increased preload. Shim it in step 2. If all of that fails, you could consider the top jamb mount, but the fact of the matter is, looking at the door and whether or not it springs open a little bit, that's going to tell you if you have a door alignment problem. You could have a jamb that's twisted, which is forcing that door to spring open. And if you do, or maybe you have a door that's warped, or maybe there's a problem with the location of the strike on the frame, you might loosen that strike a little bit and move it out a little bit closer so that it does stay latched. But when you have the door with the closer disconnected, and you hit that exit device, and if it bounces open a little bit, a door closer is not meant to fix that. Your frame and your door must be true, plumb, level, and square. And if you don't have those 4 instances, you're not going to have a proper, healthy operating door closer or door environment. So you need to mitigate the mechanical problem first. Top jamb is a more efficient way to close it, as I said earlier. I also like it because it moves the hardware up and out of the way a little bit further, although it's atypical in a commercial door and frame. But when you go through aluminum storefront, if you walk into your favorite whatever, fast food place, coffee place, whatever it is, convenience store, they put those closer bodies up on the header and it lifts it up out of the way. So that could be an option. So I wish you well, and I do hope that you report back to us with what resolved the problem. And if all else fails, have the principal at the school maybe give a safety talk to the children. And as we talked, I was an awful child, very abusive to hardware, and it's just the definition of irony that I have spent the last 30 years consulting people to try to fix hardware that has been abused by children in school settings. Thank you very much, Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply.